Welcome to One Spark at a Time with me, Rabbi Adam Miller. A Jewish mystical legend tells that during creation, something broke and shattered, scattering sparks of divine holiness around the world. It is our responsibility to do acts of tikkun olam, to repair the world around us, knowing that each time we do a good deed, we are gathering one more of those sparks, making our world a little more whole and holy. Today, I'm joined by an individual doing this sacred work of repairing our world one spark at a time. Reverend Dr. Dawson Taylor is the senior minister of Naples United Church of Christ, a position he has held since 2016. Named as one of Gulf Shore Magazine's 40 Under 40 in 2018, Reverend Taylor pursues justice inside and outside of his congregational work. He is on the board for Planned Parenthood of Southwest and Central Florida, and is the chair of GLSEN, G-L-S-E-N Collier. Dawson, welcome to One Spark at a Time.
Thanks, my friend. It's great to see you, even if through these electronic means rather than our usual summer lunches.
It is fantastic to see you. Those in our community here in Southwest Florida know that the two of us often collaborate together in a variety of projects, but as you mentioned, social distancing has definitely kept us apart recently. So let's begin with the most obvious question. How are you doing right now?
You know, doing well, I think, all things considering. Like you, I think reinventing in many ways what religious life and faith life looks like today in the midst of social distancing. Our congregation has not met in person since March 15th. And just announced last week that we will remain online only through the summer. And so, you know, those are difficult things that we're adjusting to. And then personally, this extrovert is just, you know, doing the best I can by myself. So, you know, I think all things considered, I'm doing all right.
Well, you have your dog to keep you company, so you're not completely by yourself.
Exactly. I do. And I hope you and Jennifer and the boys are doing well.
We're doing well, thank you. And I can relate to that idea of needing that energy when you're in a congregation and you're leading services through the live stream or through the other technology, as we have also been doing since mid-March. Not having those people in the congregation changes the energy and the feel of what it's like to be doing that.
I mean, that one-dimensional part is just, it's very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, and even putting up cutouts doesn't quite do the trick in the congregation. So you're the proverbial son of a preacher man. Tell us about your youth.
So I'm actually the son and nephew twice over and brother of United Methodist clergy. And so I grew up in Texas, moving about every 5 years or so, which is the United Methodist way of handling clergy. And so I had really wonderful experiences of growing up in small communities of around 10,000, and then also living in suburban Houston and in deep East Texas. And so I've experienced all kinds of wonderful people and wonderful growing up situations, but definitely growing up in a culture that was fairly conservative religiously. I wouldn't say I grew up in a conservative home, but that was, I really depended a lot on siblings and family with moving and growing up in that type of environment.
That can really bring a family closer together when you're shifting around like that. And clearly, you mentioned values being a part of this, being in a conservative environment, but having the values of your family. Among the values that were instilled in your youth, how did your pursuit of justice or social action become meaningful?
Yeah, you know, my father as a minister certainly had a lot to do with that, but you know, I think kind of an unsung part of that journey is my mother, who taught me early on. She was a force and a voice for justice, and still is. Early on, my mother, my love of politics came first from my mother. Hers was the first campaign that I worked. She ran for the local school board when I was in elementary school, and so she was also one who taught us about the value of ensuring that we were voices for those who had less, for those who were oppressed, and so I think a lot of the ways that those values were instilled came from really both parents. I think my dad probably gets a lot of the credit, but it was really from both parents.
So you mentioned your father and his role in the ministry and your other family. The obvious question is, or connection people probably draw, with your father already in the ministerial field, did you know this was the path you were going to follow?
I really didn't. In some ways, I think when you grow up in a parsonage, looking at life in the ministry, you see the really good sides of it, but you also see the really difficult and challenging sides, such as, the interrupted holidays and family dinners when emergencies happen and your parent is called away, or you see the painful things that happen inside churches that can cause deep pain. And so I was certainly open to it, but I studied political science as an undergrad and had thought a lot about law school and politics, and I served a congressional internship in college on the Hill in DC because I thought a lot about that. But at the end of the day, I think part of what moved me in this direction was when I looked back on my childhood and even college and things like that, when I was happiest was when I was at church and with people in that faith community, in those faith communities.
That's a powerful way to think about it, and to know that some of those experiences from your youth helped bring you there.
Sure.
Were there obstacles for you in entering the ministry, or things that made you hesitant beyond what you've already shared?
Yeah, growing up United Methodist, I was Methodist through and through. I mean, it's how I understood my faith. It's how I understood God, was through that lens. The most significant obstacle was the United Methodist Church, and still to this day, has a ban on openly gay and lesbian persons. Their actual wording is self-avowed and practicing. And there's still a lot of debate around exactly what that means. But I came out publicly as an openly gay man for me, finishing kind of that initial part of the coming out journey was telling my parents right after I graduated college. And so while working at a church, but before going to seminary. And so I think for me, what I really had to figure out was, what was ministry going to look like with integrity, either inside that system that had these very defined rules, or either ministry in a different denomination, which is obviously the path that I took, or ministry outside ordination, being a faithful layperson, or, different things. And so that was, a long journey of trying to figure that out, that really continued even through seminary. It wasn't until seminary that I discovered the United Church of Christ.
So pausing for a moment and recognizing our audience might not be as familiar with some of the denominations and differences in Christianity, if you can explain a little bit between where you started as a Methodist and United Church of Christ, just so that this audience can appreciate some of the journey that you've been on.
Right. So the United Methodist Church is depending on who you listen to, is either the second or third largest Protestant denomination, very strong in the South and Southeast. And so the United Church of Christ is the formation of two denominations in 1957. So a relatively new denomination, but certainly a strong history. The United Church of Christ has a strong social justice history, marched with Dr. King. The irony I find, especially around the issues of sexuality, is that in 1972, the United Methodist Church put that ban on the ordination into their book of discipline, their rule book. And that's the same year that the United Church of Christ ordained the first openly gay clergy person. And so, I find—
Were those two connected, those moments?
I've always wondered that. And I've actually spent time with the first ordained openly gay clergy person. He's still living, we're fortunate. And Bill and I've talked about that, and he's not aware of any connection. It just was, kind of the timing. But I think there was kind of a social pushback to the 60s. And I think particularly in the Methodist Church, some of that conservatism was wanting to push against some of the social progressive views of the 60s. And so I just find that richly ironic. And so there are some deep differences as far as how the denominations are structured and how they are managed, so to speak. But as far as theological differences, they're really not that distinctly different. Obviously, the sexuality and acceptance issues are quite different.
Yeah. 1972 was quite a banner year for ordinations. That was actually the first year that a woman was ordained as a Reformed rabbi. So that was quite
wow.
Apparently,
Yeah.
1972 was a major milestone year.
I was like, 1972 was watershed year for many reasons. It'd be interesting to know what was kind of in the air, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to save that conversation for another podcast and show like this. But I want to go back a little bit to your own experiences. I appreciate that explanation of the differences between the different denominations. When we are free, it can often be difficult to relate to those who are suffering injustice or indignity. Using a biblical metaphor, sometimes it's hard for us to understand why the Israelites didn't just leave being servants and slaves to Pharaoh. Why didn't they walk away? Why do people stay in situations in which they are being oppressed in that way? So talk to us about the challenge of being LGBT and yet hesitant to speak out or engage with others or to share that part of yourself.
Right. I think that's a perfect image, Adam, and I appreciate that because then I've often thought about that when we think about the Israelites in the desert and the constant complaining that Moses heard about can't we go back to life as we knew it? And
sure.
And I also think about systems theory about how systems don't want to change because it's what we know. And I think about that in my own life, being United Methodist, being what I had always known for, at that point, it was 24 years, and had known deep in my bones. And so, I remember a conversation with one of the first UCC clergy people that I visited with, who eventually would become my boss for my church in Dallas. And she said to me, we have a logo, we have a hymnal, we're a real denomination. It was like I had these blinders on that there was nothing else beside the United Methodist Church. And so it was a really interesting journey, because I think when we have this mindset that this is what we've always known, it's so difficult to let loose and to allow ourselves the freedom of seeing life in a different way.
That blinders image is a powerful one of getting focused on what we know. Last week would have marked the 90th birthday of LGBT equality icon Harvey Milk.
Yeah.
How did his efforts or those of other LGBT pioneers influence you?
Yeah, so I find my life really interesting. So Harvey Milk's death came just after a month or so after I was born, and Matthew Shepard's death came his actual physical death was on my birthday, my 19th birthday. And so I think about those two markers in the modern civil rights, gay civil rights movement, and about the profound impact. I think Harvey Milk left a tremendous lesson for all of us, that the power of our stories and the power of coming out and telling our stories. I think that was really where he pushed so many people, especially in the late 70s, and really on the precipice of the HIV/AIDS pandemic of telling that story. We just lost Larry Kramer yesterday, and such a powerful voice, of getting the government going on treatment for HIV/AIDS. And then I think about Matthew Shepard, and I think about how he startled this nation into realizing the deep hatred that was running, I think, kind of below the surface. And so I think about so much of their of the legacy that they have left. And so, profound impacts of people I never met. And yet I feel like I've certainly met people in their inner circles and things that have had profound impact, on my life and on the LGBTQ community.
clearly they shaped your experience in many ways.
Yeah.
So how did this part of coming to terms with your own identity and owning who you are shape the ministry that you started to create for yourself?
Yeah, I often talk about being so grateful for being gay, because as a white, privileged male, I think it's given me a different understanding of oppression, and perhaps an understanding of a different understanding, and a different lens for those who have to deal with this, with different issues of oppression. And so I'm grateful for that perspective. And so it's given me an understanding of my ministry and my calling in ministry to work my hardest to help create places of welcome and inclusion. And those are not all, that's not always easy work, nor is that easy to maintain. You can't just magically say, okay, we're fully inclusive now and our work is done. I mean, that's constant work, and it takes important partnerships. And so I think for me, it is about creating places of inclusion and welcome.
It's definitely more than just flicking a switch to suddenly
Yeah.
turn us from what we've been into what we want to be. Talk about how those partnerships you just referenced have been a part
Right.
of your work.
Right. And I think I think they look different in different places, and yet they have a common theme. I think about the work that we did in Dallas, around inclusion, and there was a lot of interfaith work there. I was there when we built an interfaith chapel on our campus. And then I think about the interfaith work that you and I have been a part of here, and our conversations about the tremendous work that we still have yet to do. And yet I think about the work within my congregation, and the tremendous conversations that I get to have almost on a daily basis with people who come into my office, before social distancing, and talk about, the journeys that they've been on with gay children, or really in Naples, more gay grandchildren or nephews or nieces. But now the conversations are around transgender grandchildren or nieces and nephews, and creating places where people have said to me, there's no other place in Naples where I feel like I can have this conversation. And then to create a place within the congregation where they still feel comfortable having those conversations. And so what we talk a lot about at Naples United Church of Christ is, we don't all have to agree, but we have to create places of safety where people can bring those stories and those questions and those longings, so that we have safe places to talk about them.
I want to pick up on a theme you just touched on there, not having to agree.
Right.
We do a lot of work now in an environment where the term social justice can sometimes be politicized, where people tend to be very polarized. What do you do to move forward in justice conversations in a congregation where you walk in knowing that not everyone's going to agree?
Yeah, and I think I would even go a step further, and you could certainly disagree with this too, but I think even not agreeing, but also being afraid sometimes of the conversation. I mean, to say, even if we have this conversation, will this cause great division or strife within a community that I love? So one of the things that I'm learning, and this is a growing edge for me, one of many, and that is that small steps are okay, because when you are passionate about this work and want to see great strides, I think we kind of want to snap our fingers and say, okay, we're going to take this giant leap forward and here we go. But sometimes it is the small step of, okay, we're going to create this conversation, or we're going to have this speaker, or and that's an okay place to get going, because if you can create that safe space, that might create the next safe space, and then the culminating fact of that creates more safety for people.
Safety spaces where we can have open conversations, those are all part of how we get people to even be talking to each other. I think that takes out the fear you were talking about
Right.
before, and creates a sense where people can communicate. Your predecessor created a culture of social justice and action in the congregation.
Yeah.
Where do you feel you've really made good strides in building on that foundation?
Yeah, I mean, I'm so fortunate to stand on the shoulders of Ron Patterson, who my predecessor and a friend and confidant to this day.
I often referred to him accidentally as Rabbi Patterson, because that was the relationship that we
Exactly.
had. He
Well,
was just
I was
a
going to say,
wonderful, gentle giant of social justice across our
yeah,
community.
and he sends his regards, and that would be a great compliment to him. Uh, you know, and so in some ways I get a lot of credit for the social justice work that we do, but Ron really planted the seeds and created a starting place, and did a lot of the initial groundwork that I think is sometimes the more difficult work. And so I think, what I look at it as is that, Ron created the initial, he, started planting the seeds, and then what we're doing today is we're watering them, and as the Talmud said, we're leaning over and saying grow, 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 because especially in the age that we're living in, where there's so much fear in our society and in our world, and rightfully so. That's not a critique, that's an honest statement, that I think sometimes justice work is about is standing ground and holding center, that for people who want to continue to do that work, so that there are places in which they can do it. I mean, one of the things I appreciate about Temple Shalom and Naples United Church of Christ and so many other communities of faith, especially in Naples, is I think the church and synagogues and mosques are one of the last places where people who have different opinions can gather to talk about these things. I mean, where else in our culture today can people come together with differing views? And I think that's a unique gift that we offer the world.
It is, and to be able to build on that foundation and work that way. Let's shift gears a little bit,
Yeah.
and in a moment we'll start taking questions from our audience. They can start putting them into the Q&A tab. I want to shift gears and look outside of your congregation for a moment.
Yeah.
We mentioned at the beginning that you're very involved with Planned Parenthood of Southwest and Central Florida, as well as GLSEN. Tell us about what draws you to each of these organizations.
So the work of Planned Parenthood, I think, is so important in so many ways, and it's such a remarkable organization. More than 100 years of service to really the world, but especially here in the United States, providing safe and affordable healthcare, primarily for women, but now providing tremendous care for the transgender community, for men as well. And I think what we know is that we as a nation have to continue to provide safe care for our entire culture, and we're not doing that in ways yet. And so Planned Parenthood has been there every step of the way. What people often fail to remember is that Planned Parenthood was actually founded by religious leaders who were hearing from their congregants the need for the full range of care, including abortion care, safe abortion care. And so those are the roots of Planned Parenthood. So I'm proud to serve on this affiliate board, and proud of the tremendous work that we do with our 12 health centers in over 20 counties here in Southwest and Central Florida. And then the work of GLSEN is a work obviously close to my heart. It's an acronym, former acronym, that stands for Gay, Lesbian, Straight Educators Network. And so what we do is we work with the Gay Straight Alliances in the schools here in Collier County. And I'm proud to say that we now have a Gay Straight Alliance presence in every high school and now 3 middle schools in Collier County. And when I arrived here 7 years ago, we didn't even have protections for students or teachers or staff in Collier County who identify as gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgender, and we now have those protections in place. So there's a lot of work, tremendous work, and I have to give credit to Dr. Cam Patton and her administration for caring for the safety of all students in Collier County.
I imagine through your work through GLSEN, you're not only touching the lives of these young LGBT individuals, but you're probably seeing a little bit of a mirror for yourself and what you were experiencing as a youth. What are some of the stories that you've heard from these teens today that have really touched you or moved you?
Yeah, what I often say about GLSEN work is that it's my opportunity to go back and attempt to pay it forward, because I don't know that I would have had the courage that these young people do, because they inspire me. But what I do know is that to have had the opportunity would have made all the difference in the world for me growing up as a closeted gay kid in Texas. And so what I appreciate and hear are stories about, young people who are living out their true identity at, the average coming out age today is around 13 and a half. And when I came out to my parents 15, 20 years ago, I'm trying to remember now, it was 23. And so, I mean, we've just seen this tremendous, I would say, progress, because I believe we're making it safe. We're making it possible for young people to claim who they are at a much earlier age, which makes it a healthier life for them. They get to experience a fullness there. And so, I think it's brave for a young person today to, I still think, to ask a same-sex date to the prom or to homecoming, or, I think that's even a step of inspiration and things. And young people today, it's like, it's no big deal. And I find that really pretty cool, actually.
The world's changing in many ways. And that actually segues us nicely into a question from our audience wanting to know, do you feel that Mayor Pete Buttigieg's campaign, did that change the conversation about LGBTQI? And if so, what difference did it make?
Yeah, I think Mayor Pete's campaign, and frankly his husband Chasten's presence as well as an educator and as another healthy voice in the conversation, I think had tremendous impact in our nation. I was asked a lot by people if, and I think you and I even talked about this as well, about if the nation was ready to elect an openly gay president. I don't know. Clearly he didn't make it to that stage, but man, he made it far in many ways. And so I think he had a tremendous impact in many good ways. And again, I credit his husband as well in that. And I don't think we're done hearing from him either. And so I have told this story many times, but I watched his announcement of his candidacy and tears just streamed down my face. And I was surprised by that. I didn't expect that. And I just remember telling my parents that I never thought I would see an openly gay candidate, especially with a spouse, announcing their candidacy. I mean, I was really struck by that. And so I think about, what impact did that have for a young person seeing that, who gets to really live in a world where they know about, everyone can live those dreams.
Tears of possibility.
Right, exactly.
Ground being broken.
Right.
So we've been talking about how we've made great strides, it feels like, even in the short time since you've been open about your identity and what you're seeing now with teens and even the national conversation. So we've made strides in the LGBT conversation. Let's talk about some other current justice events that are rippling right now and are perhaps troubling in other ways. Our nation is talking about the conversation around George Floyd and the events in Central Park and other incidents around concerns around racial justice and equality. Where are you on these subjects?
Yeah, I'm heartbroken is where I am. I feel like the issues of our deep racial injustice and our deep-seated racism are floating to the surface. It was the actor Will Smith recently, in response to the events in Minneapolis said racism isn't new, the filming of it is. And I think he's so right that those of us, again, with privilege are seeing, and those of us who are white are seeing what those in the African American community have experienced for so long. And so I'm hopeful that it's awakening us to a new reality. Because I mean, I just think about even, was it 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, where we finally had an arrest in Georgia with the shooting of Ahmaud. I mean, I just think about the tremendous injustice that we have seen. You know, and we date back here in Florida to Trayvon Martin about, we have unarmed Black men in what appears to be no threat whatsoever, who are not only being arrested, but then are experiencing this deep violence and literally having their lives taken. And so what that says to me is that there is a deep-seated racism that I think many of us, particularly who are white, thought was dealt with. And perhaps we have been deaf to our African-American brothers and sisters who have said, this hasn't gone away, it's just underground. And so whatever events have taken place in our nation have brought those issues to the surface. And, you know, there's a term that's coming out about life after social distancing, about not a new normal, but a preferred normal, about what will we want life to be like when we are past this time. And my hope for a preferred normal moving forward is that we can have, again, these safe and honest conversations about what we have to do to deal with these issues of privilege and race. And we clearly have so much work to do. I mean, we see last night, and it's anticipated again tonight, they're talking about the National Guard coming in Minneapolis, the tremendous violent protest and response. But who blames that community for that deep response?
It's painful to watch the events that happen for those who've seen the video. But if you've been reading pieces like Brian Stevenson's No Mercy,
right,
Just Mercy,
and then and
there's a lot of work out there that shows that the racism has been around for some time, but maybe not on the surface. I wondered if we talk about this preferred normal. I've heard the term designed normal, since we get to have a hand in controlling what it might be.
Yeah.
How do we use this to our best opportunity, recognizing that perhaps now that we've been in this time of COVID-19 social distancing, some of these things are getting a brighter spotlight because there's not as much going on. These are much more at the forefront of our thoughts. How do we take best advantage of this opportunity?
Yeah, you know, I think, you know, I joked earlier about being an extrovert who misses being out and about and with people and things like that. But I think what that also does is it causes people like me and you and others to actually kind of sit still. I mean, as much as any of us do, but to really think about what will life look like moving forward. And, and so, what I've begun to think about is, what do conversations around race and privilege look like? And those are conversations, I've thought about that before. And we've had conversations like that at Naples UCC, but I feel like we need to continue having those conversations. And what do partnerships with, deeper partnerships with the NAACP and other groups in our community look like? Because clearly those are things that need to happen. And then, so I think you're right. I think this provides kind of that pause, that stop, so to speak, in where we just go so fast and just keep moving that it's really easy to move things like that to the side because it's uncomfortable, it's divisive, it's scary to talk about those things. And maybe this is the time for us to start really creating the framework about what does that look like.
We can only hope that the sense of discomfort that we feel at hearing these stories will inspire some to move in ways to reach out, to create connections. As you said before, it's about partnerships, about relationships. I want to tie that back into where we started, because one of our attendees has asked a question about, where do you see the future of interfaith and interracial dialogues in this world where we're socially distancing from each other?
I think it's absolutely critical to the future, because we were having a conversation last night. We have a Wednesday night activity called the Clergy Roundtable, where we've been studying different books and having conversations as a clergy team. And last night we were talking about the term spiritual but not religious, and talking about that as in many ways an indictment on the mainline church today, because we think so often, particularly either unchurched or younger people who have been hurt by the church, don't want what they see in the mainline church today, the exclusion and the separation. And so I believe that one of the things that particularly those of us who want to see religion and faith done differently, I think one of the gifts that we offer is that, interfaith, not only dialogue, but interfaith relationships and conversations about race, and again, partnerships and relationships. I think that is what the future is, or we will die like fools, because I think people live in a world where those divisions don't exist. And then in faith and in churches and mainline faith communities, we act today like, well, there are these clear delineations, and then people sit in the pews and go, well, not in my everyday life, there aren't. So, why would we act like that in our faith communities? And so I think that's going to be, I think it is crucial, and not to mention it is right and just and good work.
I think perhaps a time when someone starts a conversation by saying the rabbi, the minister, and the imam, and people don't start instantly giggling or laughing, anticipating a joke,
Right.
but rather think, of course they're working together. What did they do? I think when that changes from being a joke to being the commonplace, perhaps then we've made some of those strides and those steps. And that's why we have these conversations like you and I are having right now.
Exactly.
I want to.
I just would say, I think the work that we're trying to get, more footing around here in Naples. If we can do it here, I know that we can do it anywhere. So
I'll let you make that comment. If we can do it here, we can do it anywhere. So clearly this takes a lot of energy to keep moving, to keep going. What is it that keeps you motivated? When you wake up, what is it that gets you going in the morning? And if you don't mind sharing, what keeps you up at night?
Sure. So what keeps me motivated is, frankly, it's fun. This is good, holy work, but it's also fun. I've met some of the most remarkable, loving, supportive people in this work, and so I wouldn't trade that for the world. And so I love I love my congregation, and I wouldn't trade that for the world. And I love the community relationships that I've established here in Naples, and so I enjoy those relationships. And I just think that we have a mandate to do that type of work. I think it is who we are called to be at our deepest core. And then, what keeps me up at night, honestly, I'd be curious. I know you get to be the host. You don't have to answer questions, but it would be interesting to know if things like this worry you. But the understanding of mainline Christian churches today is changing. It was changing rapidly before 2 months ago, before the pandemic really hit the United States. And now, it feels like it changes hour by hour. And so there is a great opportunity that is before us, but there's also great there's great challenge in that too, and so I know I've joked with you, and I was even joking with a colleague 2 days ago, a friend of mine in Houston, and saying, we're reinventing Christianity today. We're not reinventing the message, but we're reinventing the vessel in which it's delivered, and so that can keep me up, both anticipating and perhaps worrying about what that looks like, but also it can keep me up because it's exciting. I mean, what does it look like to create the next conversation or the next big thing? And so that's exciting for me. And then, I mean, really big questions of what does that new normal or that designed normal look like, that preferred normal? What will those conversations around race and equality and equity, to say we're all in this together? I've done some reading lately about that is a factual statement, but we're not all in this together in the same way. And so what does that look like about those who have been hit so hard, and the small business owners, and those who now don't have employment, and so what does it look like when we have further economic impact, and things like that? And so what is the church's response to that? I mean, we've seen here locally what the Harry Chapin Food Bank and Meals for Hope, and I think there's tremendous impact that we've yet to see unfold. And so, yeah, I toss and turn about some of that stuff.
I will answer part of your question, in that, yes, I too am conscious of the fact that the world in which we live is shifting very rapidly, and how we identify ourselves is part of that shift. And I think from a religious standpoint, it's an awareness on my part that we as a congregation here have shifted several years ago to being more focused on relationships, on connections. I think that actually made it a smoother transition to being virtual, because it was not about the building as much as it was about the relationships and maintaining them. It's still a huge leap to being in a fully virtual world, and I look forward to the time when we can be together again and connect in person, because there's something that virtual just can't replace. But I actually see this as a great opportunity time for us to open our doors wide. And for some of those, you use the term unchurched, we would use the term unaffiliated, those who are not connected, to perhaps see what's going on inside of synagogues, to see what's been happening inside the Jewish community since they were young, or since they chose to leave, or since they disconnected themselves. They have an opportunity now, because our doors are wide open on the virtual online realm, to engage and to see what we're doing, and hopefully find something that they didn't have before. But
yeah,
that awareness that there's a lot changing and a lot happening definitely is something that I think about often in my own rabbinate.
Right. And, I think it's interesting, we have people who visit the church who will say to us now, well, I've been watching you online for, X number of weeks or even months, and that's a new conversation for us. And it's one that our staff team and our lay leadership are having a lot of dialogue about, which is, what does it look like to present our understanding of Christianity and, our brand of Christianity here in Naples, virtually and online, versus, in person, because in person right now doesn't exist. And so what does that look like, and what does that mean? And, and again, it turns no one in my seminary or my doctoral program said, here's how to, produce a great online experience.
Right. Video production wasn't an elective you could take in seminary.
Yeah, exactly. I've had conversations with the seminary president recently about, you need to redesign the entire curriculum, because it's a whole new world.
Social media, online connections, all these things, we're all learning at a rapid pace, but it's a learning curve, and it takes a little bit to get there.
Exactly.
Dawson, it's been wonderful having you here and sharing your work as a spark collector. You've embraced this task and this calling to repair our world, organizing those around you to enhance that impact. What would you say to others who might see some of the brokenness themselves, or might feel that there are things that need help, but are unsure of taking that first leap to action?
Well, thank you for the privilege of the conversation and for your friendship and partnership in this. I would say to those who are hesitant to take that first step is, kind of what I said about my growing edge is I think it's easy to be overwhelmed by the enormity of the task. And so find that one thing that you can do. So for instance, the social distancing stuff, my introverted mother loves writing postcards to her elected officials about issues or to remind people to vote. And so she works with the League of Women Voters in her area and writes postcards. And that's her way of chipping away at what she sees as injustices and making a difference. And so I think it is that take the first step and partner with someone on issues and things that are important to you, and don't get overwhelmed by the enormity of it, but find the one thing that you can do, because together, when we all do the one thing, we will change the world.
Beautifully answered. You referenced earlier the talk about needing to help those who have been impacted. And certainly this time of COVID-19 has given us awareness not only of our blessings, but also a heightened sensitivity to those who are in need. We like to highlight opportunities to help. I think the two organizations you named are great for us to focus on today, because food insecurity is a massive concern right now, with unemployment continuing to rise, with more and more showing up at pantries and needing help. Working with the Harry Chapin Food Bank, located in both Collier and Lee County, that's actually where their headquarters are, in Lee County, as well as with organizations like Meals of Hope that are operating multiple food pantries in our area. You have an opportunity to help those who are in need. We encourage you, go to their websites, look and see how you might volunteer or give, and help provide resources to those who are in need, taking some of the blessings that we have and sharing them with others. That's part of how we create that designed normal, is a sense of partnership and relationship, community. Dawson, are there other organizations you wanted to add to that today?
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity. Actually, I'm excited. This Sunday, we're presenting a grant to Grace Place, which does tremendous impact in the estates, Golden Gate Estates. But part of what they do in partnership with Harry Chapin is they have a food pantry, and I'm trying to remember the statistics, but I think their demand, it's gone up exponentially. And I was reading an impact report earlier this week that they anticipate that the economic impact just of their service area, that their families are being impacted somewhere in the neighborhood of about $1.5 million as far as rent and assistance and things like that. So we're going to be giving a grant to them this weekend, because we know the work that they're doing there. But also, like you, we've been partnering with Harry Chapin and things like that. All of these organizations are already doing tremendous work, and now the demand is even more significant.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing that piece about Grace Place. Thank you to all in our audience who are watching or listening to our videos or listening to the podcast. This is One Spark at a Time with me, Rabbi Adam Miller. If you missed any part of this experience today or want to watch past episodes, the full videos are available on our Temple Shalom of Naples YouTube channel. You can also subscribe to the One Spark at a Time podcast, available on Apple or your favorite podcast provider. As we part ways today, I want to share with you this teaching from Gandhi. Be the change you want to see in the world. Know that every one of us has the power to fix our broken world, one spark at a time. May we be the change we want to see in the world. Thank you, everyone.